Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Quick show of hands. Do I have any New York Times subscribers here? It's actually better than I thought, but I feel like I've got a lot of work to do. How many New York Times readers? Not subscribers, just readers. OK, and then hands down, since it became clear that Trump was going to be elected US president, how many of you read the New York Times for the first time? OK, that's a good story. So usually when I get up on stage at these conferences, I'm here to sell you something. I'm here to talk about some new capability or a new business that we launched. Today, I thought we'd do something a little different. As kind of the opening said, I think there's a lot of drama right now around journalism and the business models that are going to fund it. And that drama circled a lot around the New York Times over the last few years. You know, I've been at the New York Times for 4.5 years. I'm incredibly passionate about the business, incredibly passionate about the journalism, and I want to make sure that journalism is here to stay. So I'm going to open with a question. What happens when your business is threatened with Oblivion? Not from this guy. Now, I just have to say, it's kind of amazing that the only surefire way I can get an audience to laugh is to show the US president. It's a problem. It's from this guy. Michael Moritz. He's a famous Silicon Valley investor. He did a post on LinkedIn about 5 months before I started at the Times, titled, "What the New York Times Could Have Been." And he was responding to this. It's called the Innovation Report. A group in our newsroom, very secretive group, probably the most digitally savvy editors in our newsroom, got together over the course of a year and went to drill down on how we can set ourselves up for the future. They spent close to a year, and what came out of it was one major finding. So the New York Times is winning at journalism, but failing against primarily our digital-first competitors at getting our journalism to digital audiences. So what happens when you produce a highly high-quality, very in-detailed internal report is that internal report always gets leaked. And something ironic about it is that the report was about how we're losing to digital-first competitors at distribution, and BuzzFeed was the first publisher to release it. Moritz read this, and in response, did this post. And the post talks about a lot of things, but primarily the fact that the New York Times had been just successful enough over the last 5 years to basically just get by. There was no threat, no reason to change. We had made just enough money to support our newsroom. And his broader point was that digital-first companies embrace this thing called the Jeopardy Factor. You know, if that's BuzzFeed, or that's Vice, or that's Fox, or that's any startup in the world, they walk the halls each day thinking the next day could be their last. And legacy media companies don't live that way. We think just because the quality of our journalism, we will be a successful business. And he pointed to what is now probably a funny example. All of 2013, Facebook was in second place. Twitter was about to go public. The narrative was that Twitter would be the dominant social media platform for the mobile age. And for those of you who remember, Mark Zuckerberg famously locked the entire company down and said, no one does a single piece of work unless it is mobile first. We all know how that story ends. Now, if you fast forward to the New York Times, we've had a journey for the last 5 years. We didn't necessarily agree with all of Moritz's critique, but we still invited him to our headquarters to come and talk to our executives. And he talked about this fact that we need to embrace Oblivion to change. And the only way we're going to change is to embrace that every single day in the things that we do. And I'm going to tell a success story, but a lot of people ask, how did you change a 150-year-old organization that is rooted in a tradition that has really never changed? And regardless of any product, any new capability, it really all came down to this. The fact that the possibility of your own death, your own mortality, clears the mind. It allows you to change. I'm going to take you through the newsroom, take you through a subscription business, when I'm going to start in the business that I began my career in, the ad business. How many of you work in advertising here in this crowd? So the ad business, I would say, is going through some of the craziest times it has ever gone through in its history. I started my career at Forbes magazine in 2008. If any of you remember 2008, regardless of your career, it's possibly the worst year to ever start a job in. October 2008, the financial crisis hit. I was very eager and young, very excited to start my career in ad sales. All of a sudden, there was no ads to sell. Fast forward 3 years later, I would say 30% of the magazines that were publishing out of New York were out of business. Probably 50% of the people that I knew working in media were no longer had jobs. If I look at our challenge, for those of you who need glasses, we need the blue to grow faster than the red. It's pretty clear, not so easy. Now, going back to my times at Forbes, I never would have thought that I would refer to those as the good old days. But here we are today. So I'm going to walk you through how that's changed. In the old world, a newspaper, a magazine company, we'd have a team of salespeople and marketers. They'd be sitting at their desks waiting for the fax machine or an email. An advertiser would send them this RFP. We're all waiting. We think, hey, you've got a $500,000 budget. I'm going to take this box. I'm going to put it in this box. And if we get really creative, if you're a fashion advertiser, I may put you in the fashion section. Big creative win. The internet comes along. My God, the smaller little box. I'm going to put it in this box. Or maybe even an article page, getting very adventurous. The advertiser sends that ad, we deliver that ad, finance bills, we repeat. This is a very profitable business for media companies. This is how we've survived for the last 150 years. Here we are today. There is no RFP. So if you're a newspaper, you're a magazine, you have a large team of sellers, they're not doing anything if they're not outside of the building. Our new meeting. So in the old world, a marketer would come in, we'd send a salesperson, the salesperson's boss, the salesperson's boss's boss, maybe that boss's 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 boss, into a room, we'd all shake hands, pretend to be best friends, try to charm the clients into buying something. That has changed completely today. When we bring a marketer into the building, it is much more about solving a creative challenge in the moment. It's no longer about sales, it's about surrounding them with creatives, technology, and product folks to do a live brief with the client. The client, 9 times out of 10, is going to say, I want something never been done before, something only our two brands can do together, and it needs to reach our audiences as efficient as Facebook and Snapchat. I want it to have as much scale as TV. I want to match my customer data with yours. I want it to be so big, I want it to get press. I want my boss to be on the cover of Ad Age. I want it to be nearly entirely video. And oh, by the way, none of it can look like advertising. This is the business we're in now. And we call this the fall of advertising and the rise of programming. The idea that every marketer that comes in the building wants to talk about how they can meet their customer where they are on their terms with something that they will actually enjoy. So this started happening around 2014. I would call this the beginning of native advertising. Everybody is focused on how we improve the digital advertising experience. We had a big call to make. We've sold pages in the newspaper, in our magazine, and banners on a website, again, for our entire history, banners for 10 years. We had to change things up. So the first big investment was our staff. The company, the media business broadly, I would argue any single publisher around the world, no matter if the New York Times or any publisher, you have to become a creative business. This is no longer about transacting and selling. It's about coming up with ideas and being a creative engine. Other publishers paved the way to this. I think Vice is going to speak at some point later today. To me, they are a perfect example of this model. And we had to go through a wholesale staffing change internally to do this. So we have doubled the amount of creatives on staff since this movement began. We started a creative agency inside the Times, which at the time our head of our newsroom had said, literally gone out in public and said, we will never do native advertising ever. And then I started my job, I think 3 months later, with the goal of starting a native advertising division, which was very tough. We went out, started an agency, to which is now close to 200 people across 4 continents. We're making VR films. We're producing native advertising and branded content on our site. We've acquired 2 ad agencies, one, a social influencer network focused on Pinterest and Instagram, and then second, an experiential design company, which focuses on that sentence I put earlier about I want to do something that has never been done before and only our 2 brands can do together. This is why we acquired Fake Love. We also just launched a consulting business focused on building brand newsrooms. So how can we help brands build out their own newsrooms internally? All of this just to show you that the business models have changed drastically, and we've had legitimate success. Now, if I go to 2015, we had the chance to basically say, we launched these businesses, we're going to win. We think we've solved it, we're going to pay for journalism for eternity. This is some of the work. So Tiffany, our largest print advertiser, largest and oldest print advertiser, they've been advertising with us for close to 100 years. Again, we used to sell pages in a newspaper. We've now just finished a series of films for them on their relationship with the art industry and the Whitney, all produced by our team in-house. Speaking to some of the kind of craziness of the work, I call this the innovation bonanza. Kia came in, again, in the old world, saying, hey, I want to launch a new model called the Cadenza. In the old world, we'd have sold them advertising. In this case, we rebuilt their car as an instrument, built it from the ground up, dropped it into a John Legend concert, and then allowed social influencers to come and play songs on the car live on Facebook as we stream the concert for John Legend. And then my favorite piece of work we've done to date that just shows you this transition is our work with IBM and the movie Hidden Figures. For any of you who have seen the movie, a group of NASA scientists, women and minorities, who didn't get any recognition, we set out to basically develop a program that would give them the recognition they deserved. We built 150 statue bases around the country, and then built an augmented reality app so that when you walked by these statue bases, statues of the characters of the film would pop up. So we're doing great work. We think we've solved our business model problems. We could look at it like this. Victory, it's over, but that would be a mistake, and that would be basically falling into the same trap of 10 years ago. Just getting by, thinking you solved the problem, sticking true to what we know. And the issue is, the world is changing faster than ever. I'm sure every speaker today has talked about it, but technology is changing so fast that we can't count on our business models 1 year from now. And we have to treat what we feel like is victory as more like a pit stop. Everybody internally, when we cross a lap, thinking about how can we retool the engine to compete for the next year. And that's proven out. This is our saying internally. There is no transformation moment. There is no aha. It's an operating model every day. What's happened since 2015? The print advertising market has bottomed out. We're looking at 15 to 20% declines every single year. Everybody I talk to, so if I meet people outside of marketing and advertising, if I talk to my dad or my uncle, and I say, I work at the New York Times, and they say, man, it must be hard to work at a newspaper. You've got to be digital. I would argue now it doesn't mean anything just to be digital. You have to be essentially everything to compete. Google and Facebook have completely annihilated the digital advertising market. The ad tech industry as we know it, the one that we all, if any of you guys have seen the Lumascape with all the different ad tech vendors, that's gone. Google and Facebook are now taking 85 cents of every dollar. Those digital-first companies that we wrote about in our innovation report since then, BuzzFeed famously has missed its earnings, and I'm not calling them out, I love BuzzFeed, but famously missed their earnings. Had to introduce banner ads to start to bring in more revenue. Mashable got rid of its newsroom. We all know what happened to Yahoo. These are different times. To be digital is not enough. But for us, we're facing challenges again. We have this thing, our journalism. No matter what, we know people love it. It's something that is so differentiated in the world, and it's really hard to replicate. This is our famous photo of the migrants from Syria. I think you just saw this in your last presentation. This ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize. We know people love it. So how can we find a way to get people to pay for it? The paywall model at the Times was one of the biggest moments, probably in our history. It was a big gamble. And the head of the New York Times digital newsroom at the time was adamantly against it. So the fact that we would charge for our journalism and restrict the amount of people that could see it. Fast forward to today, we have the single largest paywall in the world around journalism. But in 2016, we only had 1 million. We had 1 million. We had an ad business that was doing pretty well. I was sitting back. I was doing my day-to-day activities. Little did I know that the executives had been back, kind of strategizing, thinking about our strategy moving forward, and they came out with another report called Our Path Forward. And it basically said, we will be a subscription business first, and the way that the New York Times can survive is if we get to $800 million in digital revenue by 2020. And that essentially became my goal. It was unclear how we were going to get to it, but I know now that I have to get to $800 million by 2020. So this is a pretty dramatic challenge. The business model can be summed up in 5 words. Make something worth paying for. That's it. Everything else will be downstream from that. It seems so obvious, but it really isn't. If you look out into the world of media companies, how many media companies can you count are consumer or subscription first? Most are advertising first. And we would argue that being advertising first is a means to an end. It ends up making you having to chase scale, do things that consumers don't love. But we know if we stick to this, we ultimately can get the people that love our product, go to it every day, and those are the people that advertisers want to reach more than ever. This was one of the statements coming out of it. So, this was 2015. We'd come out with this report. It was basically a call to arms. We need to make something worth paying for. Most of our journalism at the time was confined to a newspaper, a mobile app, and a website. The mobile app, the mobile kind of craze, it's coming. You know, every year is the year of mobile, the year of mobile, the year of mobile. It still hasn't hit yet. There was this call to arms in the building to do things differently and to innovate. And I never would have thought that the first big wave of innovation would come from this cardboard box, but it did. 3 very risk-taking individuals in our newsroom dropped this box on our chief revenue officer's desk and said, we have this crazy idea. What if we take the Google Cardboard and distribute it to 1 million of our newspaper's subscribers? And to put that in perspective, people had to hand-pack these boxes in Kansas City, 1 million of them, and package them in one by one with our newspaper to get them. So when you get presented this risk, you're an executive at a company, you get a business plan that says, we can do this, it's going to cost us $2 million, and it's going to make us $5 million over the course of 2 years. In the case of this, it was put on the desk and said, it's going to cost us probably about $4.5 million. We have no idea how much money it's going to make, and no idea if people are going to like it. So our bosses said yes, which is great. What happened? What we love about this project, and it proved it to us, was that anytime we innovate, we're going to stay true to who we are. The New York Times is always about telling the most important stories in the world, drawing attention to the world's most important events. And you see a lot of innovation out there as we talk about AR, MR, XR, OR, all of these new technologies coming out. There's going to be a temptation to innovate for innovation's sake. And that film, The Displaced, took you through the migrant crisis through the eyes of 3 child refugees in Sudan, Syria, and the Ukraine. Sent the film out, not your typical VR film, alongside another film that we had shot. And if you think about VR, the ability to take someone to a brand new place, I'm arguing that no one has been here in this audience. It's Pluto. It takes 9 years to get there. I think the Space Shuttle Discovery took 9 years, and they had 3 hours to circle the planet, collect the data. They sent it back. The Times newsroom rendered it, and we published this film. So these two films distributed with this cardboard, the Sunday magazine cover story, and what happened? The readers loved it. It became this, what I'll later show you, is called the Wright brothers moment at the Times. Arguably the single biggest, not necessarily for our future, but in a single moment, one of our biggest moments of the last 10 years. We saw reactions from children who had been given the cardboard box from their parents, gathered around a Sunday table, to grandparents who were experiencing virtual reality for the first time. And we were following this live, and so was our advertisers. Like any new thing, we want to learn how to make money from it too. We always want to check 3 boxes. Our readers are going to love it, our newsroom will love it, and we can make money from it. In this case, right alongside our newsroom films, we and my team built a film for GE about biomimicry, the idea that different species of animals take cues from one another and evolve over time. So we checked all those 3 boxes and ended up with the Cannes Lion. Another victory. So we just crossed the finish line again. Virtual reality is the future, and actually, if you look back into the press, there were some articles saying, has the New York Times gone all in on VR? Is the entire newspaper going to be in virtual reality every day? I would say no. But what it did teach us is that no matter what the medium, we want to be true to ourselves. And this again, was an experiment, but now has allowed us to just scale across many different platforms. And the most interesting one that's going on right now is with audio. So The Daily has been this crazy phenomenon for us. The idea that behind the scenes with our journalists would be our competitive edge. The most remarkable thing about this is when we launched it, we had an advertiser who was along with it. That was BMW, and we guaranteed 700,000 downloads. The Daily is going to cross 100 million downloads this year. It is a hit. Our host has now groupies, which I couldn't believe it. Michael Barbaro. Does anybody in the audience here listen to The Daily? Yes. Okay, good. We have international listeners too. So The Daily was interesting. If you look at a news organization and you think about the commoditization of news, the temptation with audio is to come out and do our top 10 headlines every morning. Now, what is the differentiation for the New York Times to do that? Now, if you go, every single news organization around the world has your headlines to know this morning. What we know we can do better than anyone else is take you behind the scenes of the world's most important stories. Then you guys have followed what happened over the last week. We broke what will be probably the biggest story this year, which I never thought. So for Bill O'Reilly happened earlier this year, and I don't know if Bill O'Reilly makes international news, but the sexual harassment claims around Bill O'Reilly was a huge scoop. Harvey Weinstein will break that. That'll go down as one of our biggest stories, I would say, ever. This has been an incredible scoop. And The Daily has basically allowed us to take that journalist who broke that story and walk you through in a personal way how that story came together, the people that they talked to, and a much more conversational experience. And it's taught us something that I'll take you through as our last lesson, and it's one that we opened with. But it's this idea. I think I'm going to play a clip here, actually, from Rukmini, if it plays. Do we have sound?
It was clearly a moment when the families and friends of these young women who had been missing for 3 years were showing up to check in and show support. Then we were led to the tent. We ducked in, and as soon as I put my head inside there, I just realized we had no place being there.
Oh my God. Yeah. They look very sick.
So
these young women they looked catatonic. I mean, they looked like they had fainted or maybe were in a coma or something.
So Rukmini is arguably the world's biggest expert on ISIS and terrorism. She spends most of her day combing through terrorist social groups, chatting with them, trying to figure out what their next move is. She was there personally when she caught the German government paying off ISIS for hostage exchanges. To just report that news in a briefing isn't enough. But to take you behind the scenes on her day-to-day experiences is really powerful. And this brings us to the last point and ties into the political climate today, the idea that news is a relationship business. Now, again, you think back 5 years ago. All of the conversation was around Facebook and Instagram. Those were going to be the places that everybody will get their news. Everybody's going to get their news from Vice, Fox, and BuzzFeed. It's going to be in listicles. It's going to be in short-form video. That hasn't proven out. And the one great thing that's going to come out of this political movement is the reinvigoration of journalism and people's belief that you need quality journalism to understand what's going on in the world. What happens when you don't believe that is fake news. When you lose connection with the people that provide you the news, the quality behind it, the process behind it, the organization that allows you to trust what you're reading, you get this. And I think everybody in the world was to blame for what happened. This guy thinks we are the fake news. He's going to keep saying that every single day. He has put us in an interesting position, and one that I admire our response. You could be tempted to be the opposition in this environment, but we are not the opposition. The New York Times is here to hold truth to power and help people understand what is going on in the world, not to oppose a specific political party, and that's for one specific reason. If we are the opposition, what happens when the other political party comes to office next term? We can't just be their supporters. We have to still maintain the same truth to power. So we focused on what we do best. So we invested in our brand and the search for truth. We ran our first big brand campaign in our history this year. We aired it at the Oscars. Droga 5 made this, and the campaign is called The Truth is Hard. I took home some Cannes Lions this year. It's meant to be provocative, but not to just be opposed to Trump. It's meant to talk about and spark a conversation around the fact that getting to the truth, the hard-to-find facts, requires journalists, not just at the New York Times, but at the Washington Post or the Telegraph here. You need journalists to get to this truth. So, I'll finish on this. I talked about our business models. There's been a lot of drama. I'm not just going to pat ourselves on the back, but we've done an okay job. So, Wall Street probably would have picked the FANG, didn't he? And you guys probably don't know what the FANG is, but it's Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google. Used to be FANGs, but the S had a really tough year, so Snapchat. If you would have put your money, you had a choice. You called your stockbroker last year. He said, I want you to go all in on the New York Times. Screw Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google. You'd have said, you are crazy, you're fired. I'm going to go to the next guy. That would have been a better investment. So the New York Times stock has outperformed all of these organizations over the last year. We're having a record year. All we want to do is put more journalists on the ground and tell more stories. So thank you. I appreciate the time. And hopefully you guys will all subscribe after this.